Hello, and welcome to the CPYB exam prep session for today. The content covered in this presentation is divided by principal knowledge category and will focus on a number of topics in each of those categories. As we move through today's presentation, please type questions as you would like in the chat feature below. Questions will be addressed and discussed before moving on to the next section of content. We anticipate this session to just be over 2 hours in length, and it is being recorded. The recording will be accessible on demand through the CPYB website within the next week. Please help me welcome today's instructor, Jeff Merrill, CPYB, and president of Jeff Merrill's Yacht Sales, Inc. Jeff, if you want to move to the next screen or slide, please. Jeff is a career marine industry veteran. Over the last 30 years, Jeff has worked in sales and marketing roles for several marine businesses before specializing in offshore cruising boats for the last 20 plus years. Jeff is a CPYB and holds his yacht broker's license in California and Florida. He's a member of 4 yacht broker associations. Jeff has been active with the CYBA, California Yacht Brokers Association, serving on the board of directors for 7 years, and has served as their president from 2015 to 2016. He is also our 2023 and 2024 chair of the CPYB Certification Advisory Council. Jeff, we are grateful to have you here with us today, all the way from California. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Trish, and welcome everybody. I want to just take a couple minutes up front to thank you all for studying for the CPYB. I have been in the boating business for 30 years and I've been a certified professional yacht broker since 2012. It is the single most influential decision that I made to improve my ability to be a yacht broker. I realized that I wanted to be a career yacht broker. This was the right path to do. I am licensed in California. In California, you take a test to become a salesperson. And then if you want to become a broker, you take another test. Those are much lighter tests than the CPYB test. When I got the guide, I still have my guide. I've got the old school hard copy version. I do refer to it on occasion. I was blown away with the content and realized I really needed to pay attention and study. And that's what you guys have been doing. If you read through the guide twice and have pretty good retention, the test should not be a problem for you. There's always a little bit of anticipation whenever you're going to take a test. I get that. And I wish I could give you the answers, but I don't have the questions. Well, actually, I can give you the answers. There's a multiple choice test, and the answers are A, B, C, or D. But you have to figure out which is the correct one. And most of the questions, if you read them carefully, there is a best answer. So Staley Weedman, chairman of the CAC before me, and Don Finkel was in between us, put together this PowerPoint to help do an overview of the contents in the guide and help you focus on some of the things that you need to be thinking about to pass the test. Passing the test, of course, is the goal here. I think we have about 40 people on this call, which is fantastic. Passing the test gets you the credential. The credential then requires continuing education credits. It's really a fantastic way to stay engaged with our business. But passing the test should just be the primary goal. Being a better yacht broker should be the ultimate game plan from this. And so let's talk about some of the things you need to do to be a better yacht broker. We're hoping, and you can read the slides the same way I do. I don't need to read off the slides to you, so I'll just kind of skim through them. But we do want to make sure that you feel more comfortable with the contents of what's in the test before you take it. This is your profession. This is something that you want to be really good at, and the camaraderie and connections with fellow CPYBs really is a major door opener. I've found that when I've traveled out of California to do business, and I do travel a lot, having that CPYB credential has made a huge difference in the knowing that who I'm dealing with. If they're a CPYB, we've both done the same testing. We've both figured out how to become a better yacht broker. There's a little more trust in doing business with a fellow CPYB. It really does make a difference when you're traveling and you may not know somebody as well. So there are, as you know, reading through the guide, 5 principal knowledge categories. They're all listed here on the screen. The percentages list how much of the test is based on that. So laws and regulations, you need to know these things. It's all part of doing business. The technical knowledge gets into boat construction and various things. Yacht broker responsibilities, listing agreements and listing brokers and selling brokers, how transactions work from the listing agreement through the purchase and sale agreement. And I think probably the most important section is ethics. As you're doing this, you may have been a yacht broker for many years. This may be a new career direction for you. You'll find that the ethics that guide you and how you are perceived in the market, your reputation is your most valuable asset. So following the ethics, reviewing the CPYB ethics, I hope you are a member of your local yacht broker association, or your regional, I should say. There are 6 in North America: BC, Ontario, California, the Northwest, YABA, and IYBA, former Florida. Those all have their own code of ethics. Most of those codes of ethics are available to find online, just like about all the information you would need to know is online. Take a look at those. You'll find there's a lot of similarities to the code of ethics. And if you are proficient with the code of ethics, if that is part of how you're set up, and if you are familiar with the forms that are used in this business, that will give you all kinds of experience. You'll be much better prepared to do any type of business anywhere. So the principal knowledge topics, again, I don't want to read through all of these. You can see them. We're going to cover a lot of this information today. There will be places where you can ask questions at the end of each session. We will, each segment, we will have a place for questions. So you can either put something in the chat and then Trish can read it out to us, or if you want to, that's the way to do it. You put something in the chat, write down your note, and then when we get to those breaks at the end of each segment, we will go into whatever questions you may have. I wish I knew all the answers and could answer all of your questions. I hope that you don't stump me, but I won't be surprised if you do. There's just a lot of information that we have to process as yacht brokers. It's one of the things that keeps me excited about the job, is knowing that there's always something new. I've done hundreds of transactions. Not all of them went to closing. Obviously, the closing and the payday is the end goal, and that's what you're looking for. But if you're not learning from each transaction, maybe something's not right. And if you learn something, hopefully you're not repeating a mistake and you're learning the better practices to become better. So the CPYB credential is an international credential, obviously North America with the US and Canada, but I've done business in Australia. I've done business in Japan. Having that confidence of the CPYB and knowing that there's really no other credential out there in the world really helps me feel that I'm at an equal, or I don't want to say superior, but certainly there's nobody's going to know more than me. I know what's going on, and they're not going to try to baffle me. There can be some intimidating tactics in yacht brokerage sometimes. Really shouldn't be. We're all supposed to be cooperating, and we have these things called co-ops between brokers on listings, that type of thing. So understanding what your role is and how to do your job the best you can, the CPYB credential will get you there. So you've had a chance to read through the bullet points on this slide. Let's just go to the next one. Okay, the exam. Wow, test. Oh my gosh, this is like school. But don't think of it that way. It is an exam. You do need to study for it. You do need to think about the questions and think about your answers. There's 145 questions. You're given 3 hours to take the test. Use the whole time if you need it. But I think most people get done in about an hour and a half or 2 hours. If you're prepared and you studied, you get it. One of the advantages of doing it today is that you can get your results back promptly and know how you did. I think you have to get about 105 questions right. So you can miss about 40 questions. That's actually pretty good. It's a 70-something percentage pass rate to get there. Trish can maybe tell us the exact number. But if you don't know the answer to the question, you can skip over it. They really aren't trick questions. And we'll see some examples of the type of questions that they're not on the test necessarily, but to just give you a feel for the type of questions that you'll have. I know that when I take a test like this, I'm beat. The anticipation, the anxiety of getting ready for the test affects everybody differently. But one strategy that I've done as I've taken the two California tests and the CPYB exam, is as soon as I ended the test, I went back to my car with a blank piece of paper and I wrote down the things that I wasn't sure if I got them right. If there was something about the classification societies or something about tariffs or whatever the questions were, while it's fresh, I like to write down which ones I'm not sure that I knew. The ones you know, forget about it. But the ones that you weren't sure if you got right, write those down. If you do find out that you didn't pass the test, you then have a few things that you can focus on to study next time to get it. I'm really sure that if you read the guide twice, if you look at the questions carefully and select the best answer, you will pass this test. And then we'll welcome you into the fold of the CPYB. We'll be glad to have you. You get up to 2 retests, and then that's within 1 year of the original exam date. We're going to talk about how you can apply to take the exam as we get to the end. So let's go on to the next one. This is what your exam score report will look like. You can see what the different segments are, how you did in US and state local laws on number 1, number 10, how you did in the selling broker responsibilities. This just gives you a breakdown. So when you get your test results, and if you didn't pass, you'll be able to see which areas you need to focus on. You do need to retake the entire test, but one thing that the CAC is working on is breaking this down into the different sections. And that's not quite in place yet. We were hoping to have it ready by now, but there's going to be the opportunity to just take one section at a time. And that's a little bit easier because it's more bite-sized. For me, I was happy that it was one test. I just got it over with and I could do that. But we know that as we get older and we are more removed from schooling and education, the idea of taking a test is not that much fun. And you can get a little bit worked up on it. Don't get worked up on it. This is what you're doing for your living. The stuff is all logical. There's not trick questions. If you know the knowledge, have the answers, you'll get it. If you haven't studied that part, you can probably make a pretty good guess and get it right. Okay, so when you do want to sign up for the exam, you go to the cpyb.net website. The drop-down menu shows, as you see, step 1 circled there. Click on the CPYB exam. Then you have dates and registration for step 2, and then the online exam registration, step 3. Normally all of these tests do need to be proctored. When you come into the test, you aren't able to bring anything with you. Just take the test, a blank piece of paper and a pen, I think would probably be allowed. But I come in blank. The proctor will give me the test and sit there. There's no resources. You can't look online. You can't bring any books. You can't have your phone with you. It's just, your brain and how you do business is how you're going to pass this test. When you make your request for a test date, you usually have to wait about 3 working days to get it into the system. So our first section of 5 is laws and regulations. So this is going to focus on sales and use taxes. Now, every state and province has different ways of collecting taxes and tax dues. For example, Delaware is a non-tax state. Oregon is a non-tax state. California and Washington, typically 10% of the purchase price is a taxable item. So you need to be familiar with your own area where you do business. If you are going to travel out of your area, you need to be aware of what your buyer's responsibilities might be if they close on a boat. In Washington, for example, some states have permits you can get. When you close, if you're not paying that tax, that local tax or that state tax or province tax, then you can, at closing, apply with a permit to get an exemption or get an extension and a promise to remove the boat within a certain amount of time. So typically new boat dealers collect the sales tax themselves. You need to be sure that when you talk with your clients, they're aware that sales tax is not just going to magically go away because they can get on a boat and sail off, and that the obligations are there. California, for example, the buyer has 1 year to pay the sales tax. The broker doesn't need to collect it on a used boat. So there are a lot of variations. You just need to be familiar with what's going on. In Florida, there's an $18,000 sales cap. And on a boat over about $400,000, it's better to pay that $18,000 sales tax than to pay a county percentage. But the dinghy also has a sales tax obligation. So a lot of details to think about there. In Florida, if you're a non-resident, you can also apply at closing with a 90-day permit, and that gives you 90 days to get the boat out of the state. So be familiar with your area and be familiar when you're working with your clients as to what they should expect. This is part of the conversation you should have when you're making an offer is what are your plans for sales tax? Federal versus state requirements, kind of covered a lot of that. And then if you don't know the answer to something, be able to ask the question, know where to research it. Customs has different, if you bring a boat in from out of the country, then there's a duty payable situation. State and local taxes, foreign registry. If you have a foreign flag boat that comes into the United States, it's on a cruising permit. When a boat's on a cruising permit in the United States, it's not allowed to be marketed for sale. And that's where you see the not for sale to U.S. citizens while in U.S. waters. So understanding how all these things work, having a good understanding, and also importantly, knowing how to look it up if you're not sure. When it gets to something about legal stuff, I will usually use a phrase like, I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving you legal advice. Don't depend on this. But in my experience, is my understanding that this is how that works. But I can also be, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with a maritime attorney who does know this and can give you a better, more succinct answer. A good record keeping is a very important part of being a yacht broker. You want to have a paper trail of the transaction. There's a lot of different responsibilities for various things. Primarily when you think about it, California and Florida have a pretty good regulations on yacht brokers. They are looking at consumer protection. They want to make sure that the consumer is protected. What would we want to protect the consumer from? Well, from fraud and also from fleecing them from their money. So when a deposit comes in, it needs to go into a separate trust account. That's the normal way to do it for a deposit on a purchase. Some areas like to use escrows. I know in Washington State, there are documentation services who are not brokers, but they do business for brokers, and a deposit will go to their escrow account. So knowing the difference between a trust account, which is typically a broker separate bank account specifically for the purpose of trust, versus escrow. Who collects tax payments? It depends on the state, it depends on the situation. You should understand this as you get into a transaction. Who's required to file these different tax reports? So I mentioned the 90-day decal in Florida. Sales and use tax collection do vary. So sales tax is pretty obvious. When you close on a boat, there's a tax due. Using the example from the West Coast of Washington, if you go up to and I'm not an attorney, I'm not giving you legal advice, I'm just telling you my understanding here, just like that's how I would tell my client. If you go up to the state of Washington and you have not paid sales tax, they will welcome you with open arms and say, we would like you to pay use tax. And it's usually equivalent to what the sales tax would be. So you and your clients can get into some pretty sticky situations if you're not familiar with what the regulations are for taxes in various locations. So check that out with a marine attorney and give your clients the advice of getting in touch with a good attorney if they're planning on moving around. So there's really two different ways primarily to register or title a boat. One would be state titling. In Florida, smaller boats get an FL number, FL for Florida. In California, a CF number, which is the abbreviation for California. Those are typically smaller boats that have an annual or every 2-year registration. Larger sailboats, larger power boats, and it's, I think, 25 feet and larger and 5 tons can be U.S. Coast Guard documented. And the U.S. Coast Guard documentation process ends up giving you a piece of paper showing that the boat has been documented. That is a very good way to keep title of a boat, because if there is a mortgage, a boat loan on the boat, that will show up as a lien, and it's much easier to do clear title on that. So what are the values and purpose of documentation? I would say that is the primary purpose, is you have a good clear record of the any liens on the boat. Secret liens, I think we're going to get into that later, are not recorded there, but any ship's mortgage would be shown on the documentation. U.S. Coast Guard, you pull an abstract of title. That's another important thing for you to be aware of, the abstract of title, which you can order if you set up an account with the Coast Guard, or your broker can, or your documentation service can pull that abstract of title to see what the status is if there's a mortgage on the boat. Foreign registry, again, if the boat is foreign flagged and it's visiting the U.S., it's usually on a cruising permit, or Canada. You need to understand, if your clients have foreign registered boats, that you can't list them for sale, or at least if you do, you can't show them to citizens of the country where it's in. This gets into cruising permits. If you're not dealing with if you're dealing with smaller boats, this isn't as important, but you may get there someday. So just be aware of it. Customs duty, normally for anything that is built out of the United States, and I'm sorry, I'm more United States focused than Canada focused here because of where I live, but there's a 1.5% duty payable. So a boat built in Italy, brought into the United States, there's a 1.5% duty paid on that, or France. And that's normally included on a new boat. It's included by the broker or the dealer who's selling it as part of the cost of the boat. And any US products that are included in that boat would not be subject to that duty. One thing that's come up in the last 6 years is a tariff. Chinese built boats have a tariff for US buyers of 25%. 25%. So on $1 million boat, you would have $250,000 worth of tariff. Now, you back out the US built stuff, but that makes it very difficult for a US citizen to buy a boat that is not US Coast Guard documented, not in the stream of commerce of the United States. You can flag it a foreign flag, Marshall Islands or Cayman or something like that, but that also affects the resale value. So having the boat US Coast Guard documented with US duty paid certainly makes it a lot easier for the owner to keep it and for the owner to sell it when they're done. Cruising permits also affect Mexico. If you take your boat down to Mexico, you get an MTIP, which stands for Mexico Temporary Import Permit. That is a 10-year cruising permit to use your boat in Mexico. You're not really importing it, you're just using it in Mexico, but that's what they call it. If you sell a boat that has a cruising permit from Mexico on it, you need to make sure that that MTIP is canceled, because if it's not and the buyer goes down to Mexico, there are severe penalties, possible impoundment of the boat because they didn't do the paperwork right. So you need to be aware of these types of things, particularly as you get into the bigger boats and the boats that travel a lot more. Okay, so as far as a broker, we talked more about the boats there. You do need to have a license to do business in Florida and California. Now, California, there's a salesperson test and a broker test. Primarily, that means that if you want to list a used boat, it has nothing to do with new boats, just used boat, a used boat for sale in California, you must be a licensed salesperson or broker with the Division of Boating and Waterways. Florida, if you want to transact business in that state, you need to have a license. Now, that would be if you're representing a buyer or a seller. You can't do a listing in either state unless you're licensed there. And if you want to do business in Florida, you really need to have a license to transact there. This is not something everybody's aware of, and a lot of people look the other way. You really should look into it. If you're going to be doing business in different jurisdictions, you should look at it. California and Florida are the primary places. It comes down to enforcement. These are governments. They don't have the ability necessarily to chase it all down, but you could be in for a big penalty if you do business in a state that you're not licensed. So that's why we have this out-of-state brokers selling in Florida, California. If you have a buyer for a boat that's in California and you're from out of state, you're fine. But if it doesn't work that way in Florida. So I don't want to dwell on that too much. So there are international laws we need to be aware of. The value-added tax, the VAT, that applies to European countries. Again, that's something that there's legal ways to work around it, but there's requirements and responsibilities you need to be aware of if your clients are doing their cruising in Europe. The MCA regulations, another one to be aware of. SOLAS, which is the safety of life at sea. Those were regulations that were put into effect for the Titanic back in 1913. And I will put this as a little commercial break for Lego. My son, John, is a big Lego fanatic. And behind me, if you can see it, is a Lego model that he put together. It's about 4 feet long, pretty cool. But I will tell you that the life rafts and the life jackets there would not help any of us if we needed them. Okay, MARPOL. I didn't get what MARPOL meant. What does that mean? Well, it stands for marine pollution. I mean, when you think of it that way, then you're easier to get a handle on it. When Staley put together this PowerPoint, he did put highlights on some of the items that he wanted people to really focus on for testing. So you'll see MARPOL convention is there, and pollution. And it's, we're getting more environmentally aware. Think about pollution, think about waste management plans, discharge areas, all that type of stuff. there could be test questions on that. So that's a little reminder on some things to focus on. And I see a couple of chats coming in. So we get to the end of the section, we'll go through those questions. Federal communications licenses, so EPIRBs, radio transmissions, VHF radios, ships operator stations. Particularly if you're going to be traveling internationally, you need to be aware of what licensing is required. For the U.S. Coast Guard, again, we've covered documentation that will show if there's a lien on the boat. It also helps summarize the hull identification number. Understanding a hull identification number is very important. The first 3 letters will be the builder's name. The last 2 will be the year, the model year of the boat. And in the last 4, you also have when the boat was started and what model year, completed in what model year. So that HIN number is something you need to be focused on. That is just like your social security number or your driver's license number. That's a very important number on the boat. Normally on the starboard transom of the boat. In the last 15 years or so, they've had a second hidden HIN number on most boats. You need to know where that is. That's in case the boat was stolen, that you'd have a way of verifying it. I've had some listings where I got to the boat, it had been painted more than once, and the HIN number is obscured. And I know what the HIN number is because it's on the Coast Guard document, and I'll have the seller go to a local engravers and make a new plate up with a legible HIN number, and then affix that either above or below the original HIN number. I'm not trying to cover it up. I don't want to try to hide it. I want to make sure they're both there. Wear your safety gear, the Coast Guard requirements for life jackets and flares, and again, discharge stuff. Secret liens is on there at the bottom. That's one you need to know about. So a surveyor, a boatyard, a marina, because boats are mobile, you could skip out of town on your boat and have a debt on the boat that somebody else is going to file a secret lien on it. When you sell a boat, you need to make sure that the seller offers the boat with clear title. And so we need to make sure we have in our agreements that any encumbrances during the ownership of the original person who's selling the boat are their responsibility. So if a secret lien popped up later that some boatyard got stiffed, that goes back to the seller, not to the new owner. Federal regulations. We talked about duty a little bit, collecting it, calculating duties. Duties are calculated based on the foreign built materials and labor. You do get to back out stuff from the U.S. And so you can get into multiple duty issues if you have a lot of different types of things on the boat. Normally, a boat is the duty is usually paid when it enters the country, or it's on a cruising permit, and then it can't be made available for sale. The magic document is this highlighted consumption entry, Customs and Border Patrol Form 7501. When I write up a contract, and I use the normal YABA or EBA or CYBA or NYBA form, I'm a member of 4 associations, I do put in a separate addendum that has some clarifications. And one of them is I ask for a copy of that consumption entry form if it's available. They are often lost. Oftentimes the original builder doesn't want to share that with the original purchaser because it shows the wholesale prices. The duty is based on the cost value of the boat at that time. But it really is more important these days on a Chinese built boat that is going to be coming into US waters, because that could be subject to that tariff. Immigration requirements would really be more applicable to crew. A lot of brokers make a good living in the charter business. It's not part of the realm that I'm involved with, but you need to know what the requirements are, Jones Act, and then state versus territorial waters. Normally the state boundary, I think it's 4 miles, and the federal is, I believe, 12 miles. Check me on that, but just the state law goes out, or state jurisdiction goes out about 4 miles. Federal is about 12. And so you need to know if you are transacting in US waters or if you get beyond that into foreign waters. That can affect the duty. You might forfeit the duty on a boat if you close outside of US waters. So here's what the entry form looks like. This PowerPoint will be available within a couple of days after we do it. I don't want to try to read through this. It's a lot of small boilerplate stuff, but this is what you're looking for. And when you're taking a listing, it'd be something to ask the seller of the boat if they have a copy of this. It's probably 30% chance they'll have it. if they don't have it, and it's, again, if it's a Chinese build, I would be really looking into talking to the owner of the boat to see if they can start researching this ahead of time, so that they have it available if you need it at closing. Okay, local laws and regulations, there's always something new to be aware of. This also has to do with your business, not just your boat. So if you're doing business and it's your business, you most likely have a business license, maybe you have a corporation. What are your license fees? What obligations do you have to the state? If you're doing business in more than one state, you need to have another business license there. What tax collection requirements do you have for boats that you sell or for your business revenue? There's just all part of doing the business right, being a CPYB ethical. We want to make sure we pay our taxes. If we can figure out a way to legally minimize them, good, but we need to be responsible for them. Okay, so we're at a knowledge check section. At the end of each session, we will have some kind of sample test questions. And so this is one. So if a client is purchasing a non-documented vessel and wishes to federally document the vessel, who is the best? And it's highlighted best because that's the key trigger in this question. Who is the best equipped to prepare the paperwork associated with the documentation? Is it the listing broker, the selling broker, a documentation service, or an attorney? Well, you can probably eliminate the two brokers on there because they're brokers, right? I mean, we're flaky people. We don't know what's going on with that kind of stuff. We let our people handle that. I'm sorry, that maybe came across wrong, but that's what I said. But an attorney or a documentation service are probably good options. But since we're talking about documentation, I'm going to guess that it is C, a documentation service. So an attorney, a broker can assist somebody, but a documentation service is the best equipped because of their knowledge. They do this every day, all week long, all year round. They're very well equipped to do that. So again, the key word on that question was best. It wasn't a trick question. Just read it slowly, look for words like that, and try to make the best answer from that. So what are we expected to know as brokers? We need to know boats. We're probably doing this because we have a strong affinity for boats. We've been growing up boating, whether it's something we've been doing all of our life or it's a second career at the in the later days of our life where we want to do something fun to make a living. But we do need to understand how boats work, how they operate, how you maintain them, how to anchor, how to navigate, know about weather. That is the value that we provide to our clients. That knowledge that we have about boats, systems, as well as the transactional aspects, the banking, the paperwork, and all that stuff. The key moment for a boat, or the key event in a boat transaction, is the survey. And if you've done surveys, you have a good understanding of how they work. They're never exactly the same, but the steps and the process usually are the same. You'll meet on the boat with the survey. First of all, you get the boat under contract, schedule a surveyor, schedule the haul out yard. Everybody meets at the boat in the morning. You typically want a cold start, meaning that machinery is not run. The surveyors like to be able to check the oil, check the coolant before everything's been fired up. So make sure that's requested of the seller. The seller might think it's a great idea to have the boat warmed up when you get there. Well, you just kind of ruin that day. The survey, this all needs to be explained. This is the knowledge that we need to have to coordinate this with everybody. So the haul out is scheduled. Who's hauling it out? The buyer pays for all of this. We need to have a pretty good understanding of the whole survey process through the underway demonstration. Remind the seller, and this is a big one, we're going to most likely be running the boat at wide open throttle. And we're doing that to make sure the propeller pitch is correctly matched and to see if the cooling system is going to keep things cool. Most people don't operate their boat at wide open throttle for a lot of reasons. One of them being the economy. It's more expensive fuel-wise that way. But you do need to be able to have the surveyor test it. Now, that might be you have a hull surveyor, maybe a diesel mechanic checking that kind of stuff. But sellers don't like that. They need to be aware of it. And before the survey happens, a couple days or a couple weeks before, if they can, get out there and run the boat. And if there's a cooling issue, they need to take care of that. So, all right, so we're on questions. Trish, I can see there's chats up there. Maybe you could read those out if you wouldn't mind, and I will try to answer them.
Absolutely. So a few things to answer Jeff's question about the exam. The pass score is 73.1 and above is a pass.
Okay, thank you.
And you're welcome. And you are also correct in the fact that you can bring a plain piece of paper and a pencil or pen into the exam, but that is the only thing that you are allowed to have, just in case you need to throw some things out there for yourself to think about. We did have one question come in from Dave. The question states, do we need to know the state tax rates for every state?
No. I mean, how could you possibly, because they might be changing and counties can be different, but you need to know as you're getting into a transaction, what the tax rates are for that. And test wise, I don't know. I don't remember if there was a specific question is California 8%, but it's not. I mean, they couldn't possibly have a question like that because the rates change. You just need to be familiar with where your transaction's taking place and find out what the state taxes or county taxes are so you can advise your client. I think that would be my answer to you there, Dave.
Very good. And then nothing else has come in other than a comment on the cool Lego Titanic that your son did. So
I'll tell John that you liked it. Thanks. Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. I get to be a little bit long-winded on this thing. Again, I don't want to read the slides. I want to try to give you the perspective of being a broker. And I know we've set aside 2 hours for this. I certainly don't want to run over if we can avoid it. But the whole point of this is for you guys to have a better understanding of what to expect and to be prepared for the test, as well as be better brokers. So if
Jeff,
there's no more questions.
I have one more question that's just come in.
Ahead.
And I'm very interested in this question as well. So thank you, Rob, for asking this. Can you go back on the test and change your answers before you submit it?
When I took it, it was a fill in the dots type of test like you had in school. I think it's electronic now. So Trish, I'll have to ask you on that.
Okay, so very good question, Rob. I'm going to assume yes, but I don't know because I've never taken the test myself. But I will do some research and jot down to get you that information, because that is a really good question. Like Jeff said, I assume that you can change your answers before you submit it.
I'm sure you can, but we'll try to find out.
Absolutely.
The old, number 2 pencil, fill in the oval, and good eraser was what I took. I imagine it's now a click on the box, and if you go back and you want to change it, you can. That's a good reason. I'm glad we can have a piece of paper and a pen, because if you're not sure, hey, question 24, come back to it. And I think it's A or B. You need to make a note for yourself to come back, go through the rest of the test, and then come back and see which ones are blank. Or if you're not sure about something, you may find a question that comes in a different section of the exam triggers you to answer that question before. So I'm glad that you can have a piece of paper there. That would be a good way to keep track of what your questions are to go back and redo. All right. Are we good to go then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks. Good question. Hey, Rob. Okay. So composite materials. Now we're talking about construction and the materials on the boat. Fiberglass is what most of the boats are built out of. If you have the opportunity to visit a boat builder and see how it works, you'll have a much better understanding of the process. I was fortunate enough to do some boat building in Fullerton with Pacific Seacraft. I was with Nordop for a number of years, went to the yards overseas to see how they build it. It's a fascinating process, and I think it's really cool to be able to speak about how a boat is built from experience. So if someone's building small little runabouts, the process is essentially the same. If there's a factory or a boat builder near you, maybe you can get a tour and just kind of see things. And it's not just the fiberglass, it's the wood shop and the stainless steel. There's a lot of different aspects of boat building. We need to be familiar with that to be able to advise our clients. Now, fiberglass, every boat has issues. Every type of construction has issues. The knock on steel boats is that they rust. The knock on fiberglass boats is that they get blisters. The knock on wood boats is that if you leave them out too long, they dry up, and you have to put them back in the water to swell up. There's a lot of different aspects on boat construction that you just need to be familiar with. The guide covers this very well. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about boat building, but there are different things you need to be aware of. It does mention polyester versus vinyl ester resin. One of the knocks again on fiberglass boats is blisters. The gel coat is the outer layer. The gel coat is porous. If the gel coat is backed with vinyl ester resin, it does a better job of preventing moisture from getting in between the membrane of the gel coat and prevents blisters. So a lot of the good practice for boat building is to use vinyl ester resin in the first couple of layups. You start with a female mold and you start laying the outside of the boat first. So first you'd spray in the gel coat, then you'd start laying up fiberglass. Those first layers are what, when you pull that boat out of the mold, that's going to be the skin or the surface that you see, the hull shape. Those first couple of layers are typically done with vinyl ester. The deck, because it's not sitting in the water, not absorbing it, that could be polyester. So that's probably the primary reason for vinyl ester resin, is to reduce the opportunity for blisters. Kevlar, carbon fiber for strength and stiffness. A lot of boats are going that way. I was fortunate a long time ago to be involved in an America's Cup campaign, and we raced aluminum 12 meters. Now I see what they're doing with the America's Cup, and these guys are flying boats on the surface of the water on foils. I mean, and they're doing that because they've got high strength, lightweight materials. It's just a completely different change to the sport. Vacuum bagging is a very good way of making sure that the resin is perfectly saturated. You should be familiar with that. Infusion and scrimp are variations on that vacuum bagging process. Knowing how fiberglass boats are built, if you had to pick one construction technique, that's what the majority of the boats are you're going to probably build. So be familiar with how they're built. So there are metal boats that are also built, typically steel boats. And when you think about it, almost every commercial and military vessel is built out of steel, and maybe some aluminum in there. So that is a good construction method, but we're primarily dealing more in recreational boating, and it's much easier to build a boat in multiple sets to repeat through a mold process and have a uniformity and scale out of fiberglass. A lot of steel boats will use the steel hull, and then because that's very heavy and they don't want the boat to be top heavy, they'll do the deck or the surface structure, superstructure out of aluminum. So, but when they mate the aluminum and the steel, you've got dissimilar metals. You got to be concerned about how that's done. And that's the part of the corrosion that you need to be aware of. Steel boats have different through-hole types of fittings than fiberglass boats do. There are ways to test the thickness of the steel. You're using X-ray, ultrasounding type of techniques to see that you're trying to see how much steel is wasting away. I've done a couple of steel boat surveys. It's most of my business is with fiberglass, but it's fascinating to see how they do that. And they take different readings at different points. They understand what the plate thickness is when the boat was built, and then they see how much has been wasted away. Bilges of boats are the no man's land. And when you build a steel boat and you have a steel fuel tank or a steel water tank, how that was put into the hull, you may not know what's going on between the tank and the hull, or if the hull is part of the tank. These are part of the construction things you need to be aware of when you're talking to people, but there are places that you just can't get to on steel and fiberglass boats, and that raises a bigger concern for people. So galvanic corrosion is when you have dissimilar metals. This is a yellow item. This is a potential test question. The best example I would give of galvanic corrosion would be almost any of painted aluminum spar, whether it's a mast on a trawler or a mast on a sailboat, is a painted aluminum, and fasteners that go to it, the spreaders or steps or brackets, will normally have stainless steel fasteners that go in, and it's usually coated with the material lanolin or something like that to insulate it. But over time, when you have dissimilar metals, you have stainless steel going into aluminum, you will get corrosion. You get paint bubbling. So that is galvanic corrosion. Electrolysis is typically when your boat's in the water and there's an electrical current that is attacking two different metals and creating a corrosion process. Review the definitions in the guide for galvanic corrosion and electrolysis. They get interchanged. They both have problems with the boats, and they are things that you need to be aware of. So a good bonding system on the boat will help reduce the electrolysis on the boat. Testing methods, if you're evaluating a boat. Well, core samples would be destructive testing. So we're talking about there is if you have a lot of moisture in the deck and there's a big concern there that maybe water got in there and it's saturated through the balsa core or through the plywood, and you've got big areas of soft spots in the deck, you could do a core sample to find out what exactly is going on there, but that's not part of something that should happen on a survey. You should identify that there is a soft spot on the deck, but the boat needs to be left intact, and you can't do destructive testing. You may decide if you buy it that you need to do that core test to look at it, Moisture meters are used by surveyors. I've seen the surveyors use the moisture meter on a rainy day. I mean, I don't know how that works. It's one of those mysteries to me, but they can tell where there is moisture, and they typically, as boats get older, the bedding compounds to put down bow pulpits or various deck fittings, cleats, that bedding compound will wear out and maybe moisture sneaks in there. The proper procedure whenever you're putting deck hardware in would be to drill the hole and then seal it with resin, let that dry, and then put it down with a bedding compound. Then if the bedding compound fails, you've protected the inside of the fiberglass. I'm using a fiberglass example here because the resin's in there to protect it. Audio gauge is a tool to use for steel boats, same with X-ray. Percussion. All right, let's talk about the famous drummers in rock and roll history. Well, no, this is actually talking about surveyors getting hammered, and surveyors love to get hammered with a percussion. So they have the boats out of the water, and you see it all the time where they're tapping the hull. They're looking for a different sound that might give them an indication of a soft spot or a void there. And so that's what we mean by percussion. Penetration testing, again, some things you can check, a lot of things you can't. Smell, olfactory is another one, and that's highlighted. There must be something to do on the test question with a smell. So if you sniff that question out, then maybe you can get it right because you've got that. Other testing methods, there's numerous testing methods out there. A lot of times you'll see the surveyor go out when a boat's out of the water on the propeller, and they will line up with a stick to see the propeller blades as it rotates by to see that the propeller isn't bent. So there's a lot of different things that you'll realize are used to evaluate boats out there. If you're paying attention during the survey, ask questions of the surveyor without interrupting them. Every time you do one, you'll learn more and more about what's going on. Okay, so alternative methods, wood. I mean, that's what it all started out with, right? We didn't have steel or fiberglass. Certainly didn't have Kevlar. Yeah, I think they used to take trees, knock the trees down, and then start chipping out and come up with canoes. I mean, this is how this, and then they were stretching bark on. I mean, think about how boats have evolved. Wood is a good material. It's a material that has well, they can last a long time if you look after them. Cold molding is a modern kind of variation on wood construction. Sam Devlin, great boat designer up in the Pacific Northwest, does all of his boats cold molding. You don't have to invest in the tooling of a deck mold and a hull mold and all the different parts, and you can kind of make a one-off boat. I sold a beautiful 90-foot cold molded sailboat years ago, and phenomenal. But these are typically one-off boats, and one-off is great if that's what the buyer wants when they're buying it, but when they go to sell it, resale value, exit strategy need to be considered, and there's always going to be a strong market for a good boat. But if you have built 20 of something versus one of something, the market's kind of spoken. It's going to probably be easier to resell a boat if there were 20 of them than just one of them. So cold molding, good strength to weight ratio, less stringers and details inside, but the cost can be up there. And in the long run, I think it's cheaper to do a one-off on a cold mold than out of fiberglass construction. So paintings, coatings, we have gel coat, polyurethane, enamels, acrylics. Those are typically what you see on the surface. Bottom paints, we've got ablative highlighted here. So ablative bottom paint sort of sloughs off as the boat goes through the water. So that might be a good one just to look up and make sure you're clear on ablative as an option for bottom paint. We're getting into a more environmentally conscious world every day, it seems, and there are different, well, the bad guy stuff in bottom paint is bad for the environment. I mean, it's keeping the critters from the barnacles from attaching, and that usually means that it's a little more toxic. I know that when I grew up, we used to have pool baths. I don't know if any of you guys remember that, but you'd go into the marina. This was in Long Beach, California. Go into the slip, and there was a big plastic with a float on the top tub, essentially. And you would take the boat into that, you'd close the back of it, and you'd pour chlorine into that little tub. Well, you know, we don't want to be pouring chlorine into the bay. I get that, why we don't do it. So anyway, the laws have changed. Bottom paint is very highly regulated. And when you go to most boat yards now, you will see that they have a collection basin. They don't let stuff run off back into the water. So it's much better. When I was a little boy, I'd go down to my grandfather's dock. I'd look down, I couldn't see the bottom. Now I take my kids down or hopefully grandkids down there and they'll be able to see the bottom. It's all working, but you just need to be aware of that. All right. Knowledge of systems. You should understand, you don't have to know how to fix everything. You don't have to know how to repair everything, but you should be able to describe how an engine works with the transmission, with the propeller, the shaft, the stuffing box, different plumbing for gray water, black water, fresh water, toilet systems, hydraulics. If you break a hydraulic line, what do you do? Pneumatics, which would be air pressure, how steering works, thrusters work, stabilizers, HVAC. I didn't know what HVAC was until I learned heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So that is your climate control. Refrigeration. A lot of these things, if it's something that's hot or cold, uses a lot more power, uses a lot more electricity. So you need to be thinking about your energy management when you're working with these types of situations. Running gear. So running gear, how did they come up with that? But that's your propeller, your shaft, what's pushing the boat down below. That's just a term that's out there. It's not the lines and running rigging, which is a different type of running. Fire suppression systems. You need to have a pretty good idea of the difference between alternating current, AC, and direct current, DC. And it gets very confusing if you're speaking about AC and you're also talking about HVAC, which is the AC, the air conditioning, and HVAC. So I try to make it very clear. Looking at an electrical panel, helping your client understand what the AC loads are coming from the inverter, what the DC loads are from the battery, how the batteries take power to go to the inverter to make the AC, how generators work, alternators work. You don't have to be an expert on it. You just need to be aware of all the systems and be able to troubleshoot things if you're out there with people. Solar's coming on, wind power. There's a lot of different ways to make boats more comfortable. When I first started out, there weren't inverters. There were rarely ever any generators. It was really more camping on a boat. And now everything you have on your home has been brought onto the boat. They're more sophisticated, which makes them more complicated, which makes them more susceptible to breaking down. So you just need to be aware of it. Having the manuals, having the drawings, helping your clients be prepared for this is very important. All right, navigation, electronics. MARPA is on here as potential test questions. EPIRBs, emergency position, make sure your batteries are current. This is kind of acronym slide. DGPS, digital global positioning, WAS, DSC, digital selective calling. All these are things that you should be aware of. One thing that is not on the test, but has taken over the world that you are probably aware of is Starlink. Starlink being able to bring internet to the boat is amazing, and it's working on land and at sea. In a future variation of this test, that's probably something there. But again, part of this is we want you to pass the test. The other part is we want you to be a better broker. So I'm going to talk about a few things that aren't test related, but try to stay focused on the test. There's a lot of different nautical terms. Who came up with the word halyard? I don't know. But that's a line that's used to hoist a sail up or something. Sheets, sheets instead of lines, lines instead of ropes. But what are the top sides? What does dead reckoning mean? Deviation versus variation. So this has to do with compasses and magnetic. Deviation is something that the boat influences that compass. Variation is the difference between true north and magnetic north. So again, another thing to maybe make a note of, go back, read through that, be ready for the test on that. Compasses and charts, very important for getting around. The American Boat and Yacht Council is a regulatory body that provides best practices. They don't necessarily make it a requirement, but there are codes of good compliance, whether it's electrical systems, fire suppression systems, propulsion systems. ABYC is a very good standard, and it's something that the surveyors will look at. If they find a component on the boat that is not to ABYC current code, they will write it down. Now, it may have been built by the manufacturer, and at that time, in 1985 or 1995, whenever, the code was fine, but the surveyors are going to be looking for making sure that current codes are enforced. National Fire Protection Agency, all of the fire extinguishers need to make sure that they're current. The fire suppression systems, if any of you guys are scuba divers, you remember that your tanks need to be hydroed. Well, the tanks that they use for fire suppression systems have a similar requirement. So making sure that those are ready. There are some places where you can self-weigh them. but really it's a good idea as you're getting ready with a boat listed for sale to find out the fire extinguishers and light bulbs seem to show up in surveys all the time. So be aware of that and know that the surveyors are going to be looking for that. NEMA is the electronics to make sure that all the different components will integrate with each other. More terms: LOA, length overall, LOD, length on deck. So that's going to just be how much you have on the top. Load waterline, the LWL, design waterline, how does the boat float normally? These are some different terms on boats that you just need to be aware of. I'm not sure, well, I'm not sure exactly what the test question is, so I don't know why it says no overhang there, but the length on deck should be from the bow to the stern. And the design waterline, now that you're down at the waterline level, that would be the normal floating condition. If the boat is really light, like the seller's taking all their stuff off, it's going to float higher. If you're going on a long cruise, it's going to be heavier and it's going to be a longer waterline because the boat's going to be floating deeper. Different types of hull forms, what the bottoms are. On a sailboat, typically round; on a powerboat, more flat, unless it's a full displacement boat. Chines, understanding the different V's, dead rise. There's a lot of different types of craft out there. I ended up deciding to focus on trawlers, so that is my niche, but I'm licensed to help people with sport fishers or sailboats or anything. So I think it does help if you have an area where you specialize rather than trying to be everything for everybody. But to pass the test, you need to know about sailboats, you need to know about powerboats. They aren't focusing on one particular type of yacht broker. Racing sailboats versus cruising sailboats. Keels, so a fin keel is a more segmented with usually a separate rudder. A full keel would go kind of from the waterline back down to the rudder. A wing keel is what Ben Lexen came up to win the 1983 America's Cup, where they put the weight down lower to make it a wing. Very common. A lot of that has passed through. Knowing the difference between a catch and a yawl and where the mizzen mast is in relation to the rudder post. A cutter rig, fractional rig, meaning that the headstay is not going to the top of the mast versus a full rig going up to the top. Standing rigging would be the stays, the shrouds that are using to hold the mast up. Running rigging is the stuff that's trimming the sails, that's coming through the blocks and tackle. So again, there's a lot of terminology that if you've been a boater your whole life or been doing it for a while, it's kind of standard, but you have to remember this is a foreign language to our buyers. So if they give you a puzzled look, take a minute and explain to them what you're talking about. So yacht design, some more on some terminology. The riding moment, so that would be how far over the boat will go before we'll come back, and that also affects the limit of positive stability. At a certain point when a boat gets knocked down, it gets so deep that it won't come back up. But a lot of boat builders will come up with what that angle is. Maybe it's 140 degrees, 180 degrees would be completely upside down. So it's somewhere between 0 and 180. Where the center of gravity is on the boat, where the center of buoyancy is on the boat, and the center of effort. Center of effort really more to do with sails and lining things up to get the boat balanced properly. And then there's a little note at the bottom here. The center of gravity is directly above the center of buoyancy when a vessel is floating balanced at rest. Not highlighted, but just a good tidbit to have. Classification societies. Back when the Titanic was made out of steel and not out of Lego, they had a pretty famous mishap. And I believe that might have been what got Lloyd's started, validating construction, insuring boats. And so Lloyd's was the first society. It's a classification that has to do with approving construction plans, inspecting the build while it's underway, while it's being constructed, regular annual and routine service of vessels. There are now several different society classes, American Bureau of Shipping, the North, Veritas, Veritas. Anyway, I can't remember how to pronounce it all. It's not spelled out here for me. But you need to know that some boats, and this can have a lot to do with the larger boats or the boats that are in charter, what their classes are. They need to keep current, meaning that there are requirements on a regular basis, typically annually, to be inspected to stay in their class status. So it started off as a great way to make sure that the boats were built right. It becomes a little bit of a project to keep it all current, but you need to be aware of that. Those construction standards do help the resale value of the boat because it shows that the boat has been properly looked after, properly cared for, and you have good records. Some of you, I'm sure, our aviation buffs, pilots, and how planes are looked after and how they're regulated is incredibly smart and sophisticated. Boats don't have that type of thing. This would be the closest thing to plane inspections that I'm aware of. So we mentioned ABYC. There's an asterisk there. That's non-regulatory, but it's continuously updated. Those would be the codes that you have. And CE would be the mark over in Europe. So that's conformity with European. Basic seamanship, how to anchor, how to dock, the rules of the road, who has the right of way, who's the give way or the stand on vessel, navigation, lights, rules, safety procedures, what do you do on a man overboard? Do you do a briefing when you get people on your boat? I've had this happen, I think, twice on a survey, and it should happen a lot more. And I complimented the two owners both times, but before we got going, once we were all assembled there, the buyer, the sellers, the brokers, and the surveyors, the owner of the boat handed everybody a piece of paper and said, here's all my safety gear, here's where the life jackets are, here's where the VHF radio is, don't throw any trash overboard. He had a little safety briefing for us. That's something you should consider adding to your list of things to do. I like to put together a checklist when I'm doing a survey that lists all the Coast Guard requirements. And then when I'm on the boat during the survey, there's a lot of things to pay attention to. But oftentimes, if it's a couple, one party's really into it and the other party's not, I might say, hey, you look like you need to get more engaged. Here's the list of stuff that we need to find on the boat. Where are the life jackets? Where are the flares? Where is the discharge placard for oil or for trash? So you need to know these things. Weather, certainly you need to know, and nautical terminology we've covered. All right, so we're on a knowledge check now, wrapping up near the end of this section. There are 4 rigging plans for sailing vessels, or that include a ketch, a sloop, a schooner, and a yawl. Which is the most common of those 4? So you should probably be able to rule out a couple of those. And the ketch, the schooner, and the yawl each have 2 masts. The sloop has 1. It seems to me logically, just looking at that a sloop with 1 mast would be more common than any boat with 2 masts. And since I already know the answer, that is the correct one. So the majority of the production sailboats produced in the last many years, longer than 35, have been sloop rigged. So again, looking for the majority, looking for the right answer there. We just got to the end of this section. So what questions do we have, Trish?
At this very moment, no questions have come in regarding that section.
Okay, well, it's just, again, if you read the guide a couple times, the stuff will be easy for you. If you take note of the items that were highlighted, go back and refresh on those. That might help get the extra couple of questions you need to get over the pass-fail thing. Next section is transactions. There are a lot of different ways to put a boat under contract, and the yacht brokerage profession has really been around for maybe 30 years, not for a long time. Yaba has been around for a long time, but it started off as surveyors and boat designers. But the California in 1975, I think, put together the first standard forms for a listing agreement and a purchase and sale agreement. The other associations emulated that, put their own spin on it. And now we have a really good set of forms out there that are used regionally. I mentioned that I'm a member of 4 different yacht broker associations because I do a lot of traveling and do a lot of business. If I'm in Washington or Oregon, I use the NYBA contract. California, I use CYBA. Up through the mid-Atlantic, I use IYBA Florida, and up in New England, I use Yaba. So I like being familiar with all the different contracts. There are certain differences on them. I'd love it if we had an industry standard form that we could all agree to. We may be getting to that, but until we do, you just need to make sure that you're familiar with the forms in your area. Hopefully you're a member of one of the associations and your company's using that association's forms. But when you travel to another area, you need to be familiar with their forms. They may be making an offer on your boat using a form from a different area. One of the key things about any of these forms is to read it. Don't just forward it on to your client. Read it, review it, ask the other broker if you have questions about it. And if you have questions, get the answers. I mean, you shouldn't just dump this on your buyer or seller to figure out. You need to review it and make sure, well, you'd be dumping it on the seller because as the buyer, you would be using your own forms. Understand them. If you understand the forms and you understand the ethics, that is built-in experience. A lot of the stuff you're going to get just by doing time, by doing this job on a regular basis as a full-time job, as a profession. You will learn more with each transaction, with each phone call, with each email. There's always something to learn. But the backbone of this whole industry and being a yacht broker is understanding the code of ethics and understanding the forms. So the guide does give you some other forms to look at. Until you use them, it's kind of not going to sink in as much, but just be aware of them. See if you can spot some of the differences. It's just part of you being a broker and being able to transact and do business in various areas. So deposit and earnest money, checks versus wire transfers. I personally, well, I've got the surveys lately and people don't even have checkbooks anymore. It used to be that the buyer would write a check to the surveyor, to the diesel mechanic, to the boatyard. A lot of times that's not happening now. I've seen buyers use Venmo. Again, this is stuff that's happening that since the guide was put together, or Zelle. But when you're talking about a deposit, if you have your buyer, the old way used to be you would submit an offer, you'd photocopy the check, and you'd fax it over to the broker. Well, a faxed copy of a check isn't really, well, it's not cleared funds. It's not negotiable funds. Our company policy is all business financials are conducted by wire transfer. Wire transfer is direct. It's within a day, if not the same day, and you know that the funds are cleared into your account. There are people that use checks. A certified check is the bank is certifying that the money is in the account when the check was drawn, but the person can put a stop on that check. So you need to be very careful as a broker to make sure that you do have the funds, the full amount in the account. Wire transfers are the best way to make sure that you have cleared funds. There's a lot of wire transfer fraud. You need to be aware of that. When we send out wire instructions, the key things are the bank routing number. The most important number is the account number, and we will send that out, but we will withhold the last 4 digits of the account number so that the other person has to call us and we have a phone conversation to verify it. Bad guys are out there seeing, and when you do subject lines on your email, don't put, here are the bank wire instructions for the $1 million boat, because if there's bad guys out there, they might track that. They can spoof, or I think it's called spoofing, your email and make it look like you sending, and they substitute their own wire instructions to your buyer. The buyer innocently, because the email looks like it's from you, sends the deposit off to the bad guys, never to be recovered. Fortunately, we have never been in a situation where we've lost something like that, but our practice, our policy is to make sure that we verify verbally bank account numbers. I know that's a safe practice to make sure that you don't get burned. And again, in the subject line, maybe call them and say, I just sent you our wire instructions. When you're ready, open it up, print it out, and you can write in the numbers to go to your bank. Normally a deposit is 10%. When you, and what we usually say is, once the seller has accepted the offer, send us the deposit. I don't really want to get an offer and a deposit. I mean, they need to have the money ready to make the deposit clearly before they make the offer. But if my seller is not going to accept their offer, I don't want to have to wire their money back to them. That's just kind of a waste of everybody's time. So get the offer accepted, be ready. The buyer needs to have the 10%. I strongly recommend that you, if you don't already, and talk to your broker, consider going to all wire transfer. It's not that difficult to set that up. If you, when you're presenting an offer to your seller as the listing broker, you need to present all offers. That can happen. It happened a lot as we had the big pandemic spree that we've been living with very happily for the last couple of years with the activity there. Your job as the listing broker is to present all offers. The seller can only accept one. You can advise them your opinions on things, but just because it's an in-house deal and you stand to make more money, that may not be the best offer. And even the highest dollar offer may not be the best offer if there are contingencies involved there that to make it. You want to help the seller, guide them to make the decision that they have the best chance of selling the boat in the shortest amount of time where they can make the most amount of money. You'll get compensated for your half. If you're representing both sides, you get your both whole, but you always have to present an offer, even if the boat's under contract and it's no offer, other offer could be accepted. You still need to let the seller know. You still need to present an offer. Hey, we're under contract. You can't change anything. It's up to the buyer to accept or reject the boat. But I want you to know we've got another offer coming in there. So again, cleared funds, check in the mail is just like the joke it used to be. There really should be no checks in the mail. If you do it all with wire transfers, you should be fine. Make sure the funds are cleared. Breach of contract. Really, the breach of contract would be if the buyer has gone through the survey process, signed a contract, sent a deposit, gone through the survey process, accepted the boat, and then after they've accepted it, meaning that their deposit's no longer, I mean, their deposit's committed, it's no longer refundable, then they decide they don't want the boat, well, that's a breach of contract. And there are provisions in all of the association contracts on what to do in that case. And normally that's considered liquidated damages, and that would be shared equally between the seller and the brokers. And the buyer walked away from that deposit. You never want to get in a situation where your buyer is accepting the boat if they're not sure they can close on time. So if you need to, you might have to do an addendum to extend the closing date, and the seller has to agree to this, obviously, but don't force your buyer to accept a boat and commit their deposit unless you know that they can complete the deal. If a buyer decides to reject the boat, which unfortunately does happen and happens more often than maybe it should, that's fine. They decided they typically spent a lot of time and money to invest in that boat and decided it wasn't right for them for whatever reason, and the buyer can reject the boat without cause. Their deposit needs to be returned to them. It should always go back to the same account, wire it back to the same account. Otherwise, you get into a money laundering potential situation. When you return that deposit, before you do, you need to verify that all of the parties involved, all of the services, the surveyors, the diesel mechanic, the haul out yard, have all been paid. If they haven't been paid, you need to make sure that they do get paid either separately from the buyer or take it out of that buyer's deposit, pay those services off, and then return it. Make sure that everybody's been paid. I like to suggest and recommend that the buyer pay for all those other services separately. It's easier to do the math and the accounting at the end if you have a round number deposit rather than a deposit that's been chipped away at to send money here, send money there, that type of thing. Again, at closing, you need to close, and you need to close not waiting for a check to clear 10 days later. You need to close on time. So wire transfers happen there. There could be multiple disbursements. If you have a deposit and then the balances come into you and you as the broker are distributing the payments out, you probably have the other broker's commission to send out. You have the seller's fees, maybe the seller's bank loan, your own commission to keep. So there are multiple disbursements of funds at the end. It's very important that you keep good records of the accounting, the money coming in and the money going out. That's what we're talking about payments made and payments received. So the closing statements should detail exactly how much money came in, how much money went out. I find it's very helpful to pass that responsibility over. I mean, I'm responsible for it, but pass the process of doing that over to a documentation service who does it all the time. They do charge a fee, but it's all based on they can do the Coast Guard registration, they can do dinghy registration, they might be able to collect sales tax. A documentation service can make your job a lot easier because they do this all the time. You can focus more on the transactional part and doing boat deals than doing bookkeeping and accounting. It bothers me. I don't like doing that part as part of being a broker, but if I can get some help from other people, I'm all for it. We talked a little bit about certified checks and bank drafts. If there are any changes to the contract, stuff happens. People get in car accidents, life situations change, but the contract that's agreed to has to stay in place unless you do a written addendum to change it. If the buyer needs more time to arrange for a surveyor, they can't get a surveyor, or the surveyor, dog gets sick and anyway, there's a lot of different things that can happen. Get it in writing, put together an addendum to the contract that both the buyer and the seller must sign. Anything that changes needs to be in writing. So multiple offers, we kind of covered this a little bit. You have to present all of the offers. You can't favor yours because you get paid more. You need to help the seller make the decision on what is best for the seller. And the seller is the one who determines which offer to accept. In your contracts, you need to identify the buyer, the seller, the vessel. In IYBA, they want to know what engine type's on there, the HIN number, the U.S. Coast Guard number. The Coast Guard number is also known as the official number. In Canada, it's a registry number. It's ON. In the U.S., it's an NO. And that's also another thing when you're getting a listing is make sure you get a copy of the registry document or the Coast Guard document, and make sure that that number that was assigned to the vessel is permanently affixed on the vessel. Get a photo of that, because that's something the surveyors will find too. You need to make sure that's ready. All right, used to be faxing things back and forth. Now email, PDF, DocuSign, all that type of stuff works. It's great. It's convenient. Again, read everything though before you send it. We talked a little bit about breach contracts and liquidated damages. There's a clause in most of the association forms, time is of the essence. And that really means is that the dates are firm. If we agree to change the dates, they need to be in writing. I've been told by a number of people that time kills all deals. And I think that's a good thing to think about. Once you're under contract, you typically have a 30, maybe 45-day window to get all this stuff done. That goes by quickly, particularly as we get into this time of the year where we have holidays coming up, different distractions. Make sure that you stay on schedule, get organized, make sure that your buyers know what to expect or your sellers know what to expect, and that they understand that these dates are drop dead dates. And if for some reason we can't make those dates, we need to adjust it in writing with an addendum. Buyer nationality refers to a U.S. Coast Guard documented vessel cannot be sold to a foreign national. You have to be a U.S. citizen there. I believe it's the same thing in Canada. You can't sell a Canadian registered vessel to a U.S. So you can sell it, but they can't keep it in the Canadian registry. So think about, it's good to know the buyer's name, email, address, nationality. At closing, a lot of times the documentation service, if you use one, will want a photo of the driver's license or the passport to confirm that. When it comes to sales tax, if you are not a resident of the state where the boat is being purchased, you can show you've got a Texas license, you're not in Florida, you don't have obligations to pay that, but you'll do the 90-day decal and remove the vessel out of there. So maybe I got off to too much right there. Coordinating with the other broker, the buyer and the seller, the survey dates, what time we're meeting, what time's the haul out, where the haul out yard is going to be, what we're accomplishing. Most surveys are 1 day, bigger boats might take 2 days. So find out once you've got the surveyor lined up, what their plan is, if they want to do the survey on day 1 or day 2, if they want to do it in the morning. A lot of haul outs happen over the lunch hour. So you arrive there right before the lunch break. The boat gets pulled out with the travel lift, taken over the hard, set down on some blocks, and you guys can do the percussion testing, check out all the running gear. I take a lot of photos when the boat's out of the water, and I oftentimes will make a through-hole map to give to the buyer so they have an idea where the through-holes are. Because once the boat's back in the water, you think, oh, why didn't I look? I wonder if that was an Allen head that held that zinc in place. Anyway, making sure you've got the schedule there, make sure your buyers are prepared. Talk to your buyer about their deposit money and how they will pay. If they're doing a loan, you need to make sure that their lender is ready to go. Closing documents need to be prepared. Again, we like to use a documentation service for that. Survey reports, so that the whole deal hinges on that survey report, that the buyer's happy with it, and that their insurance and finance people will approve it. Now, typically, if the valuation is in line with what the offer price was, the lender is good with it. But oftentimes, little details, niggling details are found by the surveyor, and the insurance company wants to have those items fixed or rectified. Now, that it's all safety related. It's not unfair for them to ask for it, but sometimes it's unfair that they ask for this all to be done before they close. No, you don't want to spend money on the boat until you own it as the buyer. Give me 30 days or 60 days, and you can send a video or a photo. okay, here's the discharge placard, here's the Coast Guard number, I put it on, here's the new fire extinguisher, whatever it is, but the insurance and the finance all need that survey report. Who paid for that survey? The buyer did. Who owns that survey? The buyer. As a broker, I'd like to see a copy of the survey. I know that I'm not allowed to share that with anybody else without the buyer's written permission. The buyer owns the survey. I like to help them review it so I can explain, well, that's normal. That's just aging stuff. That's a big problem. We need to talk to the seller about that. Maybe there's a reasonable settlement we can come up with, some money towards us so we can fix it, because that shouldn't be like that. We didn't know that until we surveyed the boat. But the survey report needs to be completed in time. It needs to go to the lender and the finance people if there's a loan, and we need those people to approve it before we can accept the boat. So distributions, really, it's going to go to the lender and the finance people, hopefully to the brokers, so you can help them understand it, because they don't see surveys all the time we do. Conditional acceptance has lost favor. I'm sorry the slide is in here. I think it's a confusing thing, but what we're saying now is we'll accept the boat on these conditions. The problem with that is that that's also deemed a rejection by many sellers. So what I'd like to do is, if we're going to make a survey allowance request, a price adjustment, is put that in writing. Normally we discuss between brokers, hey, that water pump on the generator shot. You saw water leaking all over the place. A new pump's about $500. It's not the end of the world, but we'd like to have the seller reduce the price by $500 so we can buy a new water maker pump. New generator water pump. Yeah, okay, let me talk to the seller. Yeah, seller's fine with that. Okay, so then you do an addendum, a price adjustment addendum to adjust the price by that. That's better than a conditional acceptance in my view. Because it can affect and cancel the contract out, and that's why we have this yellow highlight there. I like to have a dollar figure as a settlement number, rather than having the seller fix the repair themselves. If it's a minor thing and you trust the seller, and the seller is a good handy person, mechanically inclined, that's one thing. But I really think most sellers don't want to fix the boat. If they do, they just want to fix it. Most buyers may want to put a more sophisticated fix, or while they're in there fixing that, they might as well do this because they're there. So I like to try to agree to a fair number, and we're not trying to rip anybody off, and I don't try to renegotiate on survey findings the price of the boat. But if there's things that are discovered, we'll take the boat, we'll buy it. The buyer side will take it, but we need a budget to fix some of these things. And if you get that survey allowance, adjust the price, reduces the price by this much, I think everybody's happy. Buyer can take on the boat, knowing that they've got a budget, they can hire who they want, when they want to get that done. The seller closes, they don't have to be bothered with fixing things that are done. If you do have the seller fix it, or that's how it's arranged, you need to have a way of making sure that it's all been done correctly. And that's why we talk about how the repairs are checked. Brokers should not get involved in that. We should not be the ones checking that things are done right. A photo, a video is one thing, but really the surveyor who did the boat should be hired to come back to check it if you get into something that's major. Some buyers don't want to buy a boat that's not ready to go, and they want these things fixed. That's a difficult conversation, but that's one you may have. Another thing you can do to keep the deal moving, remember time kills all deals, is do a holdback at the closing. You get an estimate on what the repairs are going to be, and you say, we're going to close. Mr. Seller, you're going to get all but the last $10,000, or Mr. or Mrs. Seller, you're going to get all but the last $10,000. Once these items, and you need to have it listed, are completed, and you have this much time to get them done, then we will give the money back to you to complete the sale. But the sale's completed, they just haven't been paid everything. So holdback is an option. I don't like it. I would rather just get a survey allowance, price adjustment, close, and have the buyer leave with the boat and a budget to fix the projects that have come up. A lot of times there are missing documents. Now, as the listing broker, you really need to be thinking about this. You need the dinghy paperwork, you need the Coast Guard documentation. If you have good records on the ship's radio license, maybe the electronics list, all these types of things should be there. So there's a big problem that happens at closing, and there's a name for it. It's called dinghy drama. A lot of the bigger sailboats and power boats have that mothership, and they also have a tender or an auxiliary. And for some reason, that's just not the paperwork for the auxiliary craft is not kept in the same priority or in the same location And so you can do lost title searches. There's things to do there, power of attorney for that. But if you list a boat for sale and it has an auxiliary craft, a dinghy or a jet ski or something like that, get the paperwork going for that right now. And sometimes people buy a boat and they've got the bill of sale, but they didn't register it. There used to be this whole tender to thing, which has sort of fallen out of favor. It would be tender to, you didn't have to register it, but that really has gone away. You really need to register the dinghy separately, and you're going to be doing a bill of sale for the big sailboat and the dinghy or the big power. There's two boats in the transaction. If you are changing the flag, if you are, going to a different country, if your buyer is from out of the U.S. and it's U.S. Coast Guard documented, then there's a deletion process. They delete the vessel from the U.S. Coast Guard documentation, and they usually need that deletion or that the deletion is in process before they can register it in the country where they want to have it there. We talked a little bit about vessel inventory and repairs, and we've talked about auxiliary vessels, jet skis, tenders. It's very important for you as the listing broker to identify what's included, or if there's anything that's not included, technically excluded in the boat, so that the buyer knows what they're getting. Okay, liens. So typically there is a mortgage on the boat. That's the type of lien that you're talking about. And that lien needs to be paid off. There's normally a per diem kind of 10-day window. You talk with the seller's bank. You find out how much they owe on the loan. If we close on this date, how much it's going to be. And they figure out that that balance and that per diem there. And what you're looking for is a satisfaction of mortgage, that the preferred ship's mortgage has been satisfied. Then that gives clear title to the buyer. Sometimes the boat is held in a trust or a company or an LLC. LLCs we can't be involved in. As brokers, we don't do that. It's a security exchange license that's required. It starts off as a purchase and sale agreement. And if it's going to be an LLC, which is not uncommon in the bigger, more expensive boats, then you need to get a maritime attorney to take over the transaction. And instead of getting a commission, you get a consulting fee. They end up doing all the closing and they handle the legal aspects of that. What do we do if there's a deceased seller? Well, you need to get a copy of the will. You need to find out if there's any, a copy of the death certificate. You need to find out if there's anything in the will regarding the sale of the boat. It's uncommon, but possible, and it's yellow highlighted, so there must be something to do with that on the test. Payment or payments to the seller. Why would it be plural? Well, if they have a bank loan, that needs to go to satisfy the seller's mortgage, and then the balance would go to them. So that'd be the lender payments right there at the end. All right, we're at the end of this section for the knowledge check. So some questions here. Let me move something here. Okay. Broker A submits a verbal offer on a vessel and is waiting for the signed contracts to be returned from the buyer. So, hey, Bill, I got a guy. We're working on an offer. We're offering $100,000. We're in process. I'll get you the paperwork later. It's a verbal. It's in process. It's not ready yet. At the same time, broker B obtains and presents a written offer to the seller. Who or what determines the final buyer? All right, so broker A, because they were first with a verbal, broker B, because they've got a written offer, the broker with the buyer's funds in trust, or the seller? Well, we already discussed this before. The seller is the one who has to ultimately decide which deal they want. Can't do a lot with the verbal offer. It's nice to know that we're working on something. I had a situation recently where a broker who had looked at a boat that I had listed for sale told me they're writing up an offer. And I told the seller, we're expecting an offer. I said, well, call everybody else who has been interested in the boat and let them know there's an offer coming in. Well, I don't really want to get into a bidding war, but I mean, if you need me to, but can we wait until we have the offer in hand before? No, we gotta close by the end of the year. This is a December thing. So reluctantly, I made contact with the other people who are interested and said, we have an offer coming in. I just wanted you to know so you don't miss out. And then the offer never materialized. So I felt kind of like an idiot there, but I was trying to comply with what my seller's requests were. So anyway, the seller needs to decide who accepts the offer or which offer they accept. All right, another one. Following the closing and as part of the transaction, the U.S. Coast Guard document is surrendered to the buyer, the seller, the Coast Guard, or the state where the sale took place. Well, since we know that this test is also offered in Canada and they have provinces, B can probably go away. The buyer is going to want to be Coast Guard documented. So the buyer's a possible answer. The seller, well, they're selling the boat. They don't need it. So I would say it's between buyer and Coast Guard. And I think that realistically, the Coast Guard is going to have to issue a new one. So answer C, Coast Guard. Hopefully that you followed the logic on there. We are at the end of this section now. So it looks like the chat room has a couple of notes. Trish, what do you have for me?
Yes, we do. First question from Dave. Can a Canadian get certified to be able to sell in Florida or California?
I don't think the answer, I believe, is yes. California, you would have to be under a broker to take the sales test, and then once you've done that, after 2 years you can apply for the broker test. California does require that you have a business location. You can't be a PO box. So you'd need to have some sort of an address in the state, and Florida does as well. So I guess that would be the limitation, is what is going to be your address. I do business in Florida. I don't live in Florida, and I'm not Canadian, but I'm considered a foreign entity because I don't live there. Through YABA, you can get a My Florida office thing, which is a separate discussion. I don't want to confuse the CPYBs here for the test. But YABA offers essentially a virtual office in Florida that complies with the codes for Florida, so that you don't have to actually have a physical presence yourself. You hop on with a bunch of other people, and if they need to inspect the office, they're there. Your closing statements all get filed at that office, and there's a location there. Conversely, I don't believe that a U.S. citizen can become a licensed broker in Canada, because I looked into that before. And without being a resident, without having a physical location there, brick and mortar, I couldn't do it. But and I'd be happy to help you figure that out if that's something you want to pursue. But I would say as long as you have a physical address or the ability to have one, you can be. I don't think it's restricted in the U.S. and California or Florida. Sorry, kind of wishy-washy your answer. That's a good question. I don't have the exact answer for you.
Thank you, Jeff. Next question from Steve. Should a broker refer a surveyor or survey firm to a buyer, or simply refer the buyer to SAMs or NAMs?
Well, the code is that you submit the buyer, or you recommend that the buyer go to SAMs or NAMs to select a surveyor. That's the way that we're supposed to do it. I think it's okay to offer the buyer a choice of surveyors. Let's face it, they're coming to you for your expertise. They don't know a SAM surveyor from a NAM surveyor. You need to find somebody local. If you offer 3 options and you tell them these are people that our clients have used, they've been happy with it, it's a conflict of interest for us to say, I booked your surveyor for you. This guy's great. He's going to do a fantastic job. You're set. That would be a problem. That's unethical, because how does the buyer know you're not in cahoots with them? But if they're buying a specialized racing sailboat, they don't want some guy who only does power boats. They want a guy who understands racing sailboats. Or if they want a trawler, they want somebody who's familiar with trawlers. So you want to help them identify in the area where the boat's going to be surveyed good, capable surveyors. You may talk to some of your broker friends, fellow CPYBs. Hey, I'm from California. I've got a client who wants to buy a boat in Charleston. I don't know anything about the surveyors there. We're buying this kind of boat. I see your CPYB. Can you help me give my clients some suggestions on who the good surveyors are in your area? But always give a choice of 3, and be very careful about pushing them into one or the other. We often give our clients a list of questions to ask and interview a surveyor. First is, are you available on this date? We need to get the dates nailed down. What do you charge? How long does it take for your turnaround? Can I follow you around while you're going through the survey process? You want somebody who understands the boat that your buyer's buying. You have to be very careful telling your buyer who to use. If you give them choices, that's a lot better than saying, go to SAMs and figure it out on your own, or go to NAMs and figure it out on your own.
Very good. Laura has a question. Is it acceptable for the buyer or surveyor to sell a survey to the seller or anyone else?
Yeah, the buyer in this case owns the survey. They can do with it whatever they want. We as brokers can't do anything with it without the written permission. If the buyer rejects the vessel and they have their survey that they paid, let's just say $1,000 for, it's not worth anything to them. I mean, they spent $1,000 plus their travel, a hotel, diesel mechanic, oil reports, haul out. They spent a lot of money to reject this boat. If there's another buyer who comes along who's interested in purchasing their survey, they are able to sell that to them. It happens infrequently, but it's possible. The kind of going rate, if you will, is half the price. So you'd sell it for $500. But I would caution you, if this is your buyer who's buying that survey, don't use that as your survey for the vessel. Every day that a survey is done, the boat changes the next day, or can. The survey is only good as a report on the day that it was conducted. And there may be a lot of things on that original survey that still haven't been addressed, but your buyer really should get their own survey. If you can ask the broker, what were some of the highlights or lowlights of that survey? So when we hire our own surveyor, we know they can't give it to you in writing, but they might say, oh yeah, well, I mean, the engine failed and what happened was whatever it is, and the seller's now fixed that. That's better. I used to ask for a copy of the previous survey when we made an offer, just for the informational purposes, but it ended up creating more problems than not. A lot of times on certain boats, they don't go that far. The same surveyor comes back and surveys the boat a couple years later. They're smart. They keep their old survey. They know, I mean, a lot of the stuff's kind of fill in, and they'll look at the seller and go, you know, I surveyed this boat when you bought it 5 years ago. There's 18 things on here that I told you then, they still haven't been done. Guess what? They didn't correct themselves. So yes, surveys can be sold. I would never use that to rely on for a purchase. And the surveyor may have limitations. They may not allow the buyer of that survey to sell it to somebody else. And they certainly aren't responsible for whoever bought it to ask them questions. So it's kind of a dead end. It's possible, but I don't think it's a good practice. And Laura, if there's more on that you want to talk about, let me know, but hopefully that helps you answer that one.
Thanks, Jeff. That's everything.
Okay, Trish, if you could put the clock on, we're pretty far into this and I want to keep going, but I want to take a break. We're about an hour and a half into it. If we can take a 5-minute break, give everybody a chance to get a glass of water, hit the restroom, we'll come back and we'll get into the next section, which I'll queue up.
All right, Jeff,
So
5 minutes.
5 minutes and we'll come back and talk about broker responsibilities.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thanks. All right, Jeff.
Okay, seeing the Titanic behind me gives me that sinking feeling. Sorry, I just, it's still early for me. All right, so broker responsibilities. This should be stuff that you're pretty familiar with because this is what you're doing. Let's get into the next one. So there are a lot of details involved in doing a transaction. There may be customs paperwork, the Coast Guard documentation, dinghy paperwork, managing deposits, accounts, hiring surveyors. There's a lot going on, but one of the key issues that you need to have as a salesperson or as a broker is to make sure you have very good record keeping, primarily of funds, but also of conversations and what's said, and make sure that anything that's verbal gets put into writing. And then having good communications. You really are a conduit, is one of our primary roles as a broker, to share information, to make sure that the right people know the right things. The better you are as a communicator, the more likely there'll be less to be misinterpreted, and you'll have a better game plan for getting things done. So keep good records. I keep notes all the time. I write things down all the time. And certainly when it comes down to the funds, make sure you or your business knows what's going on for closing, for sure. You can make sure you have the in and the out. So the role of a listing broker is to get a listing, to get the boat listed for sale. There are typically two types of listings: an open listing where the seller can sell it themselves or use any other broker, or a central listing where everything would have to go through you as the central broker. Depending on where you are, what market you're in, there's too much effort involved in an open listing and not know that you're going to get something to show for it. Our company specializes in trawlers. If the person wants to do an open listing, we're just not interested. We just want to be able to, hey, if we're not the right guy, then get somebody else. But sellers think that by having more brokers list their boat for them, that they might be able to get more money for it, but I don't think that's the case. I think realistically, you want to make sure that you're trying to get a central listing. When you get the listing, you want to make sure you get photos, good current photos, nothing worse than old dated photos. I've called brokers before, and one of the questions I'll ask, in our write-ups, we'll say photos taken December of 2022. Most photos taken. You get the beauty shots from whenever they were in paradise, and those are the lead or the attractive photos, but the salon, the galley, whatever, the deck, they should be current. And you, if it doesn't state that, and most people don't, be sure to ask. I almost had some people get on a plane to go look at a boat, and I just so happened to mention to the broker, hey, when were these photos taken? He said, oh, they're about 8 years old. We are in the process of getting new photos. So, well, does the boat look the same? Oh, no, the boat's really in shambles right now. So, okay, well, I don't need to tell you what I said after that. But getting the layouts, getting the descriptions, we spent a lot of time on our boats putting together a very thorough write-up, and it really helps answer a lot of questions. Now, there's another strategy that some brokers use, and that is you put the minimum amount of information on there, not the hours, whatever, just keep it as short as possible so that the boat buying public has to contact you to get that information. I get it. That's one way of generating leads, but you're probably not generating qualified leads. My opinion, having done this for a long time, is more information is better. I would like them to call me and not have questions about stuff that I should already have provided the answers to. So that accurate inventory listing, make sure when you're there, you get copies of the, I have a scanner app on my phone. Scanning is so easy to do now. It'll take essentially it's taking a picture, but it's a PDF. And I will scan the U.S. Coast Guard document. I will scan the dinghy paperwork. When I get into the engine room, I'll take photos of all the placards on the engines. I'll get a picture of where the Coast Guard number is, the hull identification number on the dinghy, on the outboard. That's part of my responsibility as a listing broker, to have all this information. If I can get a copy of the previous survey, which I will not distribute to anybody, but just it helps me with the write-up. Surveyors usually do a pretty good job of writing down all the stuff that's on the boat with model numbers and things. Now that can change, of course, but it really helps you put together a good, thorough listing. We also have, with my company, we have a separate disclosure document. So we have a listing agreement and a disclosure. And I want to know what I'm representing. I want to know if the boat has had an insurance claim, if it's had a fire, if it's struck by lightning, if it's hurricane damage, on and on and on. Last oil changes. I've got a pretty thorough disclosure document. That's what they're talking about securing the owner's declaration of condition. If you know it, you need to disclose it. You need to find out what you're representing, because there aren't any secrets. It's going to come back and be revealed at some point, and you don't want to be caught flat-footed. So you need to press the seller to get this kind of information. Our job as a listing broker is to represent the seller's best interests and to communicate with them, to keep them posted on what's happening, certainly to let them know about any offers that are coming in as soon as possible. We also need to screen buyers and other brokers. We don't want anyone to be on the boat. I won't let somebody be on the boat without the seller's permission. I can't always be there. If the seller can't be there to meet them, I like to have the seller designate a local boat person, a marina friend who can meet them. We'd like to do all of our showings by appointment, but we're also a remote office. If you have an office in a marina with slips and it's very easy to go show boats, different thing. But you want to make sure you try to screen people. How do you screen them? I don't think you can. Typically, if someone's traveling to see a boat, that's one qualification. You don't want tire kickers. You don't want people just putting foot traffic through the boat. It's difficult. You can't ask a buyer, hey, do you have enough money to buy on this boat? Are you ready to write up an offer today? That just comes across wrong. So how do you screen them? You can be subtle. If there's another broker as a client, hey, you got to start somewhere too. A lot of people get into this process. They want to see what a Albatross 45 looks like. They have a 5-year plan to get one. Well, you don't want to discourage them, but you don't want to waste yours and your seller's time spending a lot of time showing them a boat that they're not ready to buy right now. Although I can tell you, in my experience, I've had people who were many years out turn around and tell me they're ready to buy right now. So there's a saying, I don't like it, but I'll tell it to you that buyers are liars. I don't think that's true, but you just need to be very careful. It's almost impossible to screen people. With the internet, they have a pretty good idea of what they're getting into. And I like to give everybody the benefit of the doubt until they prove that they're no longer buyers. You need to know where the boat is, how to get to it, if there is a parking guard, if there's special places to park, there's a locked gate. Get down to the cart. A lot of times you get to a marina and you need to get a key in the marina office. You'll surrender your driver's license. They'll give you a key. Make sure you're done before 5 o'clock with the showing, or you have a key, but they have your driver's license. So that's one way of making sure you come back. If there's any changes to the boat, if the owner is in the process of putting in a new inverter or getting the faulty air conditioning or fixed, you need to know that kind of stuff. Or if there's something that you notice on the boat during a visit that they need to attend to, let the owner know about other sister ships that are coming on the market that might be competition for them, and then make sure that you get your listing out to as many people as you can. You're also going to be coordinating the seller side of the survey and the sea trial. You'll need to provide closing information to the documentation service. We've talked about multiple offers multiple times. I'm not going to touch on that again. Very important that you understand what the commission split is, not necessarily before showing a boat, but certainly before submitting an offer. If an offer is coming in, our policy is we don't submit an offer without having, and it can just be an email. Hey, yep, this boat's a 10% boat at 50-50, or special circumstances. If the boat, the expectation is that we're dealing with a 10% commission, which you got to thank the founding fathers of our industry for a 10% commission. When you think about, we do a lot of work, we earn it, but there's other people selling other products, jets and houses and things. They don't get anywhere near 10%. And those guys who are in those businesses are shocked at what our numbers are. But my point is, make sure that you identify what it is. There are times where you may have a boat in on trade, or you may have a special situation where you've agreed to work with somebody on a lower number. If a broker inquires on your boat, before they even do a showing, you should let them know if that is not a full 10% commission. I like to make it very clear up front that we're 10%, 50-50. And then if they want to make an offer, we send them our co-op agreement. If I'm dealing with another broker and they don't have a co-op agreement, I will send them an email. Hey, just to confirm, Bill, this is a 10%, 50-50 deal. Please just hit reply back yes. I don't want to get into a discussion or an argument after the fact, after the deal's well along the way. Selling broker, this is a confusing thing to me. You're the listing broker. The person representing the buyer is the selling broker. I stumble on that a little bit because I'm representing the seller. How come I'm not the selling broker? Well, because I'm not representing, the buyer is represented by the selling broker. All right. Make sure that if you are the selling broker, now you're representing the buyer. You can't just go walk on the boat and show it. You need to get permission. You should set that up as an appointment. Always leave the boat in the way that you found it. I mean, I usually say open only doors and turn on only lights, but the breakers, everything needs to be put back. You should just really maybe only open up doors and get some air circulation in there and turn on the lights. And other than that, you definitely don't want to operate any machinery. A lot of times, if the seller's there and they know that the through hole is open for the cooling water, they may be asked to start an engine, but you should not do that. You should also never operate the vessel unless there's an emergency. Your insurance probably doesn't cover it. You don't want the responsibility of operating the boat. Don't just be in the habit of saying, like, our insurance precludes me from operating the boat. If the seller has a stroke, obviously you got to come in there and stand in, but you don't want to be responsible for operating the boat during a survey. And we're talking about a showing here. You don't want to run things during the visual showing. Should just be sort of a walkthrough, cosmetic, get a feel for it. The selling broker representing the buyer is responsible for getting an offer, getting a deposit, 10%, and using a standard industry form. Even if you know the seller and you're representing the buyer, all communication should be gone broker to broker. You need to avoid direct contact with the seller. Looks like that might be a test question. Again, commission splits agreed upon before. Again, it says before showing the boat. That's fine. I mean, if it's particularly if it's going to be a shorter commission, let them know. We're happy representing a buyer if it's the right boat. If we don't get our full 50-50 on a 10%, we can probably live with that. But we don't want to find out once an offer is submitted. Oh yeah, by the way, did I tell you this is an 8% deal? No, that's wrong. The selling broker representing the buyer will be coordinating the survey, the sea trial, the closing. They'll create an acceptance of the yacht. Typically, you have an accept reject date. They will do draft closing paperwork. They'll let the listing broker know of any details if there's a delay, if the lender needs something, if the insurance wasn't approved, whatever. And their job when you're representing the buyer, you need to help the buyer. Ideally, before you submit an offer, you should make sure that they have their financing in place. It's a requirement in the EBA form, I think in the YABA form as well. There's no financing contingency. You don't want to go all the way to the survey, have a great survey, the boat is fantastic, everybody's happy, and then the buyer says, oh shoot, my loan didn't come through. No, you need to know that before. They should have their insurance game plan ready. Insurance is becoming more and more difficult. A place to keep the boat and how they're going to handle repairs if there are repairs at survey. Funds would be in your in your trust account, or if you're using a third party in their escrow. You don't want to release any funds without authorization. When we get a deposit, we send the buyer a receipt. Hey, we received $20,000 on the purchase of this boat. When we are moving to closing, we use an escrow company, and we will ask the buyer to put it in writing, and we'll prepare it for them. This email authorizes you to put our $20,000 to such and such a documentation service. Everything in writing, and then we will call that other person, verify their account number, send it to the documentation service. When a closing occurs, really should be in the purchase agreement. The closing occurs, in my view, when the seller has the funds in their account. So on closing day, I'm always checking. Usually I'll see a wire comes in with our commission. That'll be my cue to call the seller. Hey, we just got paid. Did you get paid? Great. Okay. And that's when the documentation service will release the bills of sale to the buyer. You need to have separate account for your business and for your trust. That's where the no commingling of funds is there. And again, escrow account would be a third party. Trust account is really what's required with most states. Certainly California and Florida require that. I believe some of the other states do as well. If you are in the business of being a yacht broker, you really should have a separate trust account. It's just a different bank account and called trust account. There's not any special formula rules, but you have a separate account for deposits and then a separate account for business. I have a business account and have a separate trust account for my Florida and for my California. All right, so now let's check. Which of the following is the listing broker not, and here's the key word, obligated to provide to the selling broker who represents the buyer? A list of known deficiencies, B, previous surveys, C, photos and layouts, D, vessel's location and access. Well, we already talked about surveys pretty heavily here, so we know it's not previous surveys, but I want to switch this question back around. You should tell them A, any known deficiencies, you should provide photos and layouts, and you should make arrangements if they want to see the boat to let them know where the vessel's location and how to access it is. Okay, survey is the sole property of the seller, of the buyer, whoever ordered it. Now, if you're talking about for a particular, if the seller, when they bought the boat, they have a survey, that's one thing, but the person who pays for the survey owns it, and they're the only ones who should do anything with it without unless they give you written permission. Okay, done with that section. Any questions?
Yes, we do have one question. In your experience, what percentage of your business is allocated to documentation services?
I try to do all of my deals through a documentation service. In California, though, I'm required to have all of the California deals run through my trust account. I have to do all the paying in and out of my trust account, but I will have a documentation service help me with the closing statements. So that's how we run our business. And that allows me to spend more time working on videos, articles, website, volunteering for CPYB, being involved in yacht broker associations, and not doing the dreaded paperwork if I can avoid it. But it's important to get done and get done right. I think that was your question. Hopefully that's the answer you were looking for.
Thanks, Jeff. No other questions have come in.
Okay, home stretch. I believe this is our last segment, and I know we've run pretty close to our 2-hour time allotment, but this one goes pretty quick. Ethics, very important. Your reputation is everything, and how you conduct yourself, how you conduct business. It's never worth getting one payday and throwing it all away. Keep that in mind as you do business. Treat people the way that you want to be treated. CPYB has a great code of ethics. It's just really kind of common courtesy stuff. It will help you maintain long relationships. And as a CPYB, you'll know that the other CPYBs have the same code of ethics. They're going to be they're not going to be taking advantage of you. They're going to be taking care of you. We all need to help raise the game of professionalism in our chosen profession. There are right now approximately 440 CPYBs in the world. Now, there have been more. Some people have retired. Some people have let their continuing education points lapse. You're in a very elite group as a CPYB. And I know we've got 20 or 30 people on the call today. That's a big run. And this is just something you absolutely, you've already invested the time here. You've bought the guide. Get this thing done. And when you do get it done, do the continuing education. It's very easy to keep on top of it. You need 21 hours or 21 credits over 3 years. There's a lot of ways to do that. We talk about it on the CPYB website, but the ethics and understanding the contracts and the forms make your job so much easier and make you so much better. So understanding how to work broker to broker, how to take care of your clients, your relationships with the public, how you handle boat yards, how you handle service people, how you deal with surveyors. All these things are important for you to have good communications and just not, someone once told me, and I wish I could say that I came up with it, but if you just remember what you said, wait, how's this go? I can't remember how to say it. If you just tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said. That's what it is. So if you get these fabricated, convoluted lies and stories, it's hard to remember what you said. Just tell the truth, just lay it all out there, and then you don't have to remember what you said because you told them the truth. Sorry, I stumbled on that. If there is a dispute in a transaction, then you need to know what your resolutions are. Arbitration is something that California offers. I think Yaba and Florida do as well. Ideally, you go to mediation. What you want to try to avoid is a jury of your peers, because the general public doesn't understand boats, doesn't understand the lucky privilege we have to be in a business where we are helping people buy and sell boats, and they just don't understand the intricacies of a yacht and sale purchase. But the yacht broker associations who offer arbitration and mediation. You're dealing with professionals, experienced people who get it, who have probably been in similar situations or seen similar situations and can help get the thing sorted out. Mission splits, again, industry standards. There are variations if there's a boat taken in on trade. Normally, the industry standard is a 10% commission. When I first started, it was 70-30. And the person bringing in the buyer, the selling broker, got the 70%. The person with the listing only got 30%. Then it went 60-40. And now it's the same amount of effort to do the listing as to find the buyer. It's 50-50. I think that's fair. But we can't regulate that. We can just tell you what the standards are. And then there are variations, as I just discovered. If you're doing a deal and it's your listing, the boat is in your area, and there is a broker who has to travel, and they aren't going to be traveling to attend the survey, well, you need to decide if that's cool. Should they still get the full amount, or should you adjust the commission because they're not there? Now you have the responsibility of looking after their client as well as your own. A lot of the contracts put that in there. And so disclosure, what the percentage is, and if the percentages may vary depending on participation. During COVID, I had a couple situations where, and I'm not saying that COVID's over. During the early days of COVID, maybe I should say, I had a deal in Florida, and I talked to the other broker. I said, I'm just not really that excited about getting on a plane and going to Florida in June when it was April of 2020. And he said, I got you. I know you were here. I know you showed the boat. I know you know this boat. I had sold that boat before. You don't need to be here, and it doesn't change our split, which was really cool about them. I wrote something about that for the CYBA newsletter that, hey, in these strange times, maybe we can't require that, and we should be a little more lenient. Do you really want somebody who's just traveled across the country in a plane of coughing people to be there and attend the survey? So that could be considered unusual circumstances. Anything that's going to be modified to the commission should be in writing. We've talked about verbal and multiple offers many, many times. Make sure that the purchase and sale agreement is signed by all parties. If there are pages in the agreement, they should all be initialed by both parties. Backup offers, in my view, are, what's the right way to say this? I don't believe in backup offers. I believe that you can only have one contract at a time. You have to present all offers, but you can't give somebody priority that if this guy bails out, we'll accept your offer. That to me is kind of more what a backup offer is. It's good for the seller to know that there are other people interested in it. But oftentimes, if there is a real strong party breathing down the current buyer's neck, that gives the buyer incentive to close the deal. So how you handle backup offers, you can talk with the guys in your, or the gals in your staff about it, but you can't really have the seller accept a backup offer. They can only sign one contract at a time. So all offers should be in writing. You can do an email. They don't necessarily have to be the original now. Everything's done with DocuSign and Yacht Closer. Ethics. So we're going to talk about some listing broker responsibilities and some selling broker responsibilities. The listing broker should disclose any significant water, fire, or structural damage. Again, we actually have a couple-page list of things that we want to know in trawlers specifically that we're dealing with. If there's been hurricane damage, if you know it, you need to disclose it. As the listing broker, you need to find out from the seller what insurance claims they've had. Have they had a fire? Have they been struck by lightning? You need to find out these details so that you can present the boat properly. It's going to eventually come out up front. How do they own it? Is it in a trust? Is it an LLC? You need to understand the title. Again, disclosures of defects. If they know of things when they bought it that they didn't address, if things have happened during their ownership, you should be aware of that. If they've stiffed somebody, you're going to have this mechanics lien coming up. I mean, it's sort of an awkward conversation about unpaid bills, but you need to be responsible for that. Find out about any prior damage and any survey history that's happened on the boat previously that could materially affect the value of the boat. Okay, so which of the following is the broker's responsibility when listing a boat? So listing broker. A, gather all pertinent facts from the seller, even negatives. B, disclose exclusions in the listing, like the dinghy's not included. C, determine any lien information on the vessel. D, all of the above. Well, those all look pretty good to me. I think that's all stuff we need to know. Yep, the listing broker has the responsibility and obligation to fellow brokers and potential buyers to give them the most complete and accurate information possible. And it says, even if, I would say, especially if the information contains negatives. You just want to have a good, honest, clear, ethical, this is what we know. And then if something does come up at the survey that you didn't know, you can honestly say, I didn't know that. I'm sorry. That's one reason why we do the survey. If there was a recent listing on a boat that I was aware of. The boat had sunk at the dock. Water had come into the engine room up to the top of the engine. It had all been fixed on insurance. When the broker listed the boat, they made no mention of that in their listing write-up. And I had a potential client who went direct and didn't use me, call me about it and say, I didn't find out about this till I came down to see the boat on the showing. That is just wrong. That should be disclosed. I have a listing right now on a boat. It's a Motor Sailor 56. The owner of the boat had a terrible injury operating the boat. It was related to equipment failure, which has since been fixed. And so I mentioned there was an accident on the boat. If you would like to know more about it, please contact me. I didn't want to go into the gory details of what had happened, but I wanted people to know about it. Most people were concerned with what was there damage to the boat, and there really wasn't, but there was damage to the owner of the boat. And I think that's important to be disclosed. All right. Well, questions. What other questions do we have?
No other questions at this time.
Okay, so again, well, thanks. So we've completed it all. I'm not sure, I've lost track of the time, but I think we're just over 2 hours. Thanks for your patience with me here. Here's how to sign up for the exam. Go to the CPYB.net. We covered this right at the beginning. There it is again. It's all online. Go to the drop down, and you can also access this recording in a couple of days. It'll be available. There are a couple of other recordings up there. I think we typically keep 3 different recordings up at a time. Just so everybody has a different approach on how they explain it. I hope that this was helpful to you. I really love being a CPYB. It really has made a huge difference to me in my profession. I like the continuing education component of it. I like knowing when I call somebody who's a CPYB that I have a higher level of expectation. I really encourage you to study for the test, pass the test, look forward to welcoming you to the CPYB ranks. I'd also encourage you to get involved in your local yacht broker association and help out your fellow brokers, encourage them to become CPYB. We need to raise the professionalism in our industry. This is the way to do it. That's all I have. I'll get off my soapbox. If there's any other questions, I'll keep it open for another minute or two, and then Trish, we can wrap it up.
Very good. Thank you so much, Jeff, for your time today. Very, very good session. We also would like to thank everybody for joining us on the call this morning. And as a reminder, the webinar will be recorded and made available, like Jeff said, in the next week or so. And also, I did just drop in a Google form. We value your feedback. So please take a couple of minutes and let us know about your thoughts on today's session. Any feedback is great. And it will also be sent to you via email if you don't want to take it right now in the next day from Zoom. So
yeah, I didn't realize we did that. If you guys could, that'd be great. We want to make this better. I'm now the chairman of this. If there's something that we didn't do or we didn't do right, I can take it. I want to know if there's things that you liked, let me know and we can talk to the other presenters about it. I don't like to take those survey forms. I'm just like you. We've already went over time, but if you would take a minute or two to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. So thank you for that. And all the best for this, wrapping up this year and getting ready for 2023. Good luck on your test.
yes, definitely. Rob, send me an email and I will send you a link to the CPYB exam prep sessions that are already on our website. If that one's not working, I do apologize, but I don't want to take up anybody else's time. So if you,
I looked at it because I reviewed a couple before giving mine, and there's 3 of them up there right now. Nick Friedman did one in March, JP Scove did one, and I think Tim Hoving did the other one.
Here we go.
If you're going to pick one of the 3, I thought Nick did a very good job. Not that the other guys did, but Nick was very thorough. He's a talker like me. I mean, it probably goes over the time limit, but you go into more detail. Some of the other presenters kind of read through the slides, which is part of the deal, but I like to add a little bit more to it. And I think that gives you a little bit broader depth for taking the test. And again, It's not just taking and passing the test. It's being a better broker and making this your profession. So I'll sign off with that. Thanks, Trish.
You're welcome. Rob, I just dropped the link into the chat as well. So that one will take you right into the CPYB exam prep. And then just click on the third link to the right, the exam prep sessions, and you'll see the 3 that Jeff was just discussing. Hope that's helpful. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
See you later. Bye-bye.